It became more and more difficult to make decisions in difficult times. That's why it was right to end this government by firing the finance minister. That's why it's right to hold a confidence vote in December. And that's why it's right to hold an election in February next year. Now the people will have their say, and we're asking for their vote.
That was the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, after accepting his Social Democrat Party's nomination to lead it into next year's snap elections. Now, it has been a tumultuous month for Scholz and for the SPD. As you just heard him outline, it began with the collapse of his three-way coalition government after a bitter breakup with the pro-business Free Democrats. Now, that set a political process in motion that, if all goes to plan, should result in snap elections on February 23rd. The political crisis in Germany comes as Europe's largest economy falters and with Scholz's popularity at an all-time low. It unleashed a debate in the SPD whether Scholz should even stand again or whether he should step aside. Today, the party leadership confirmed that they think he is the right man for the job.
We have in Olaf Scholz a Chancellor who has steered us through difficult crises, who has shown nerve, composure and steadfastness on the big international issues. And on the other side is Friedrich Merz, who has never been a mayor or a councillor, and he's never been part of a state or a federal government.
Now, that name you just heard there, Friedrich Merz, is the Conservatives' candidate for Chancellor and Scholz's main rival to lead the next government. There is lots to discuss here, so let's bring in DW political correspondent Simon Young. Hi, Simon. Now, this is likely to end the weeks of speculation over Olaf Scholz and whether he'll be his party's Chancellor candidate. But how much damage has all of this done to him?
Yeah, and I think this has damaged this sort of protracted debate about who would lead the Social Democrats in the election. It's really damaged the party's damaged Scholz, and there were already plenty of people in the German public who were concerned, were wondering about the leadership qualities of Olaf Scholz after his three-party coalition fell apart, as you mentioned, in early November. And what came after that? Well, there were a couple more weeks of questions about whether Olaf Scholz is the right man to be Chancellor going forward, as people were talking about the Defence Minister, Boris Pistorius, as possibly the better alternative. He's much more popular in the polls than Olaf Scholz is. And it took 2 weeks for Boris Pistorius to finally come forward and say, well, actually, I'm not available. I'm backing Olaf Scholz instead. And you can also point the finger at the SPD party authorities. The people who sort of manage things there haven't really delivered on what they are supposed to do, really, which is to keep the party together, to keep the grassroots in tune with the heavyweight politicians in Berlin. So it's been a very shaky start to this campaign. As the campaigning gets underway, I think the SPD will be hoping that there are no more questions going forward about whether Olaf Scholz is the right man. We'll have to wait and see. And by the way, he still has to be actually officially confirmed by a party conference that's going to be held in mid-January.
So polls show support for the SPD collapsing. So what could Germany's next government after the election in February potentially look like?
Yeah, well, that, by the way, is an increasingly difficult question to answer in Germany. There are more parties than there used to be. And we've also got another thing, the phenomenon of people changing their minds relatively late in election campaigns is becoming increasingly common. So it can be difficult to predict German elections nowadays. And also, by the way, this election will be unusual in that it's being held in February. What effect might that have on turnout? Nobody knows. But having said all that, it does look at the moment as if the centre-right Conservative CDU-CSU party is essentially in a solid place to win. And its leader, its candidate for Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, the CDU leader, as long as he avoids gaffes, and he hasn't always done that in the past, he does look, according to the polls at the moment, as if he will be the man to take on the role of Chancellor after February. Now, the question for him will be, what kind of government can he put together? What kind of coalition? Ironically, it may well be that he ends up again in coalition with the Social Democrats, presumably not then under Olaf Scholz. But there may also have to be another smaller party involved, and a lot will also depend on how the populist parties AfD and BSW do. So there's quite a lot of unpredictability about the next German government.
It's a pretty hostile economic climate to be going to the polls, isn't it? I mean, big German companies are announcing thousands of job cuts. Fixing the economy is obviously going to be a massive task for any government. Is it the economy that is going to be the main concern for voters in this election, do you think, Simon?
I think it's going to be a massive issue. As you say, there have already been layoffs, particularly in the auto industry, and there are fears that there could be more of that going forward. From the Social Democrats today, we heard that they will be concentrating on issues like pay and pensions and other social issues. They think that that's where they can really galvanise their base and maybe surge in the coming months. The other big issue, I think, undoubtedly will be the war in Ukraine. It's a big concern for a lot of voters, and it's an issue where Olaf Scholz, the sort of styled as the peace chancellor, with his cautious approach on Ukraine, avoiding escalation, has a very different line from the CDU leader Friedrich Merz, who talks about delivering long-range missiles to Ukraine. That will certainly play big, but it is going to be an incredibly difficult job for Olaf Scholz to catch up almost a 20-point deficit in just a few months until the election at the end of February.
DW's Simon Young. Simon, thanks so much.